Trains. 12 times a year, the leading magazine of railroading captures the excitement and romance of railroading yesterday and today. Compelling articles and photography let you in on the action both trackside and behind the scenes. And nothing beats Trains Collector's Issues, a highlight of your subscription. Steam and diesel, passenger trains, freight operations. Whatever your passion, whatever your interest in the wide world of railroading, Trains takes you there. Classic Trains takes you back to railroading's golden years from 1930 to 1970. Post-war streamliners, early diesels, the last of steam, the great trains of yesteryear still run in Classic Trains. Climb aboard for accurate stories about railroad operations, history, and technology. Experience the human side of railroading from both the railroaders who lived it and the fans who loved it. Nostalgic recollections, scholarly journalism, and remarkable images. It's all here 4 times a year in Classic Trains.
Trains magazine is the most widely read railroad magazine in the world. But more than that, what we try to do is make Trains the best general interest railroad magazine that anyone can find. Best writing, best photography, a look at the past, a look at railroad history, but also lots of information on current events, railroad news, that sort of thing. Why Trains on Location? Well, a big part of what's in the magazine is our reporting and our photography on railroad operations, mainly freight operations, but also passenger trains, commuter lines, that sort of thing. It's been a mainstay in the magazine for decades, and we thought with the video what we could really do is bring that whole railroad operations thing to life through the medium of the video.
What I like about shooting these shows is that I love trains. I've been shooting trains pretty much all my life, ever since I could first hold a camera, and it's just one of my favorite things to do. When we shoot these programs, we do a lot more than just go trackside and drop the camera next to the tracks and hit the record button. Trains prides itself on excellent photography. It's very important to them, and I like to bring the same quality to the videos. For most rail fans, one of the most interesting things about railroading is what's up front, the locomotives, and I'm certainly one of them. I'm a huge diesel fan. And in each one of our Train on Location shows, we try and devote a section of the show to the rolling stock, to the locomotives.
One of the things we think sets our On Location series apart is the way in which we try to tell a story in each tape. And there's a beginning and there's an end and there's lots of little stories within the main story as we try to tell people what's wonderful about the places we go, the trains we see, the railroaders we talk to, and really make it an experience that's fulfilling in the way that only a great documentary can do.
We go out into the field with our fingers crossed, armed with as much information as we can, and spend about anywhere from 8 to 12 days in the location and shoot as much as we can. We know that we want to cover this piece of railroad, and I have sort of a concept in my head going out there what we want the show to be. But the shows often take left turns, and it ends up being something really different and really surprising.
I think Kevin brings credibility to the show. Unlike having a standard voice talent in the show, it brings a more personal element to it. He's the editor, he's sort of the man behind the scenes, and I think the viewer probably is able to relate to him a little bit better because he has a better understanding of trains and what's going on, as opposed to somebody who's just reading the script.
East of here, the railroad has a personality of switch runs, transfer runs, freight classification, but west of here, that's where the high-speed action really begins.
It's fun. It's a lot of fun. It's whoever thought of, cutting these huge, massive, sometimes gorgeous trains to, either rock or classical or, different styles of music.
A big part of each program are the animated maps we use, which are created by Julie Mainwood. In all our shows, we cover anywhere from 30 to 200 miles of railroad, and these maps are used throughout the program so viewers always know where they are. The tapes have attracted a lot of attention. Certainly they've been well received in the railfan community, but we've also won 5 Telly Awards. The Telly series is a series of awards in the non-broadcast specialty video field, and we're very proud of the fact that 5 of our tapes have been given Tellys. One of our Telly Award winners was our tape on Sand Patch, the CSX crossing of the Alleghenies in Maryland and south central Pennsylvania. And I think one of the reasons we won the Telly Award there was because we had a nice way of blending together historical black and white photographs, interviews with some people like historian John Hankey, who told us a lot about the area. We visited the Mance Training Camp, which is an informal gathering place for rail fans in the area. We talked with an operator in one of the CSX interlocking towers on the line. Weaving all these elements together really told a story, and I think that's what made the difference in the awards. As executive producer of this series, one of the fun things is to get together with the train staff and watch a new show. And to be honest with you, we really get a kick out of it. We hope viewers do too. Hi, I'm Kevin Keith, editor of Trains Magazine, and welcome to Trains on Location, the best of the East. In this program, we'll show you highlights from our On Location series featuring such great eastern spots like Sand Patch Grade, Horseshoe Curve, the Northeast Corridor, and Bayview Junction in Ontario. And if you like this program, check out our companion tape on Western railroads. And now, the best of the East. Conrail's Boston line between Albany, New York and Springfield, Massachusetts offers many of the things we associate with a great train watching spot. Awesome scenery, freight and passenger trains, and interesting motive power. When it comes to moving trains through the Berkshires, it's what's up front that counts. With that in mind, here's a look at the locomotives used by Conrail and Amtrak on the Boston line. Rare or unique locomotives tend to multiply our interest in certain railroads or regions. Case in point, the 28 SD80 Max that Conrail uses almost exclusively on the Boston line. Built by General Motors in 1996, the 80 Max have a number of special features. First, it's powered by a 5,000 horsepower 20-cylinder prime mover. The 710 series diesel engine uses electronic fuel injection and larger turbochargers to boost fuel efficiency, a problem with earlier 20-cylinder designs from builder GM. To keep things cool, the 80 Max use a split cooling system powered by 2 separate pumps. Due to the increased size of the radiators, the radiator hatch was designed in a V shape, harkening back to GM's 20-cylinder SD45 from the 1960s. Train crews ride in a so-called whisper cab designed to enhance crew safety and comfort. The cab's entire passenger compartment and about 1 foot of the hood ride on rubber pads. The pads in turn ride on shock absorbers. This allows the cab some freedom from the underframe and reduces both the rough ride and interior cab noise. The 80 Max wear a white bow wave, identifying them as AC traction units. AC traction motors give the Max more pulling power than equivalent DC traction motors. With fewer moving parts than a DC motor, the AC traction motors offer lower maintenance requirements. The AC traction motors ride in self-steering or radial trucks. Unlike the rigid trucks found under other six-axle diesels, the HTCR truck under the 80 Mac literally steers through curves by keeping the driving wheels parallel to the curvature of the rails. The other six-motor units you'll see on the Boston line are C30-7As built by GM rival General Electric. They pack a 3,000 horsepower diesel engine that uses 12 cylinders, 4 less than the engine found in other C30s. At the other end of the scale are Conrail's B23-7s. The 23 stands for the 2,250 horsepower generated by the B23's 12-cylinder engine. The B stands for the unit's 4-axle trucks, in this case a pair of AAR Type B road trucks. Locals on the west end of the Boston line regularly draw B23s. Conrail even likes them enough to paint them in the newer Conrail Quality paint scheme. Nor is Conrail shy about running the B-23s backwards on the main line. Just like the old road switchers used by the B&A in the 1950s. The rounded cab contour of the Dash-7 locomotive contrasts sharply with the angled lines of Amtrak's F-40s. Introduced by GM in 1976, the F-40 uses a 16-cylinder 645-type diesel engine to turn out 3,000 horsepower. It rides on a pair of 4-axle Blomberg road trucks, essentially the same truck introduced by GM in the 1940s. The ranks of Amtrak's F-40s have been reduced in recent years by new P-40 diesels built by GE. Dubbed Genesis units, the 4-motor P-40s turn out 4,000 horsepower. A handful use a third-rail shoe that allows them to operate in third-rail electric territory between Croton-Harmon and New York. The rest of the P-40 fleet are diesel electrics equipped with GE's sturdy DC traction motor. The Boston line tops the Berkshires at Washington Hill, the most challenging spot on this demanding mountain railroad. The original Berkshire is in England, south of Oxford. The English pronounce it Berkshire. Depending on who you ask, the Boston line crosses either the Berkshire Hills, Berkshire County, or simply the Berkshires. The name of the mountains may be open to interpretation, but not the severity of the railroad grade that crosses them. On the east slope, the railroad faces a 1.65% ruling grade. With a ruling grade of 1.38%, the west slope isn't much more forgiving. Although the 80 Macs have replaced older 3,000 horsepower diesels on a 2-for-1 basis, train tonnage stays between 7,000 and 7,500 tons. Whether there's more power available or not, 7,500 tons is the limit to what the grades and tight curves of Washington Hill will tolerate. CP-140 harbors a relic from another era. This concrete milepost marker is typical of New York Central's physical plant. A few concrete whistle posts also survive on the Boston line. They're likely to remain in place until a track machine accidentally breaks them or knocks them down. Like their counterparts at CP-187, these signals survive to guard a controlled crossover point. They mark the location of a set of crossovers 2.5 miles from the summit of Washington Hill. They also give advance notice of an approaching train, a blessing for train watchers on the Boston line. Even if you subtract the milepost marker in the signals, Washington Hill adds up to a great place to watch trains. In 1998, Conrail was split between its Eastern Railroad rivals, Norfolk Southern and CSX. CSX took title to the Boston line, where it remains a vital New England transportation link. Train watching along the Hudson River in upstate New York is a double treat. On the East Bank, Amtrak intercity passenger trains and Metro North Commuter Agency suburban service dominates. Across the river, CSX operates Conrail's former West Shore line, which is freight only. Freights have several destinations in the New York metro area, including CSX's busy North Bergen Yard. But for passengers, Grand Central Terminal serves as an elegant, historic gateway to the Big Apple. For many years, New York City believed it didn't need railroads. Unlike Philadelphia and Baltimore, it was right on the ocean. What's more, the Hudson River was navigable for 150 miles upstream, unlike the rivers around Boston. In conjunction with the Erie Canal, the Hudson channeled all the commerce of the West right down to New York. There was just one problem. Both waterways froze solid in winter. The solution was the Hudson River Railroad, organized by Poughkeepsie interests in 1847. 20 years later, financier Cornelius Vanderbilt folded it into the New York Central and Hudson River, later to be known as the New York Central System. Vanderbilt wanted a magnificent station for his railroad in New York City, a depot to bear the name Grand Central. In truth, the two-level building that stands today on 42nd Street replaced the original Grand Central Depot, built in 1871. But that doesn't diminish its significance as America's premier railroad terminal. High above the 42nd Street main entrance stands the sculpture group Transportation. Created by Jules Couthon and installed in 1914, it shows the gods Minerva, Mercury, and Hercules. At their feet sits a monumental clock with a diameter of 13 feet. Officially opened on February 2, 1913, Grand Central is considered an architectural triumph. Its main concourse measures 300 feet long, 120 feet wide, and 125 feet high, with a Tennessee marble floor. Many of the terminal's more than 10,000 panes of glass can be found in its dramatically arched windows, which measure 33 feet by 60 feet. The famous information booth, with its gold clock, remains a favorite meeting place.
Okay. And is Croton Falls down at the Brewster North?
Okay, Croton Falls is over here.
Okay.
You can take any one of these trains that have time down here.
Okay, and is it about approximately a half an hour ride?
The subtle elegance of Grand Central's suburban concourse disguises the problems the builders faced when they began construction in 1903. Building Grand Central required digging deep into the bedrock below Manhattan to bring the track to an average depth of 30 feet below street level. Despite the upheaval, rail service continued uninterrupted. Grand Central Terminal hosted one of the most famous trains in America, New York Central's 20th Century Limited. In 1947, over 65 million rail passengers, the equivalent of 40% of the United States, moved through Grand Central. The terminal you see today is the result of a total revitalization plan implemented by Metro-North and MTA, which owns the building. The restoration, which started in 1996, included the cleaning and replating of the original chandeliers. On the verge of the millennium, Grand Central Terminal stands to regain its position as New York's premier meeting, shopping, dining, and transportation hub. A hub of a different sort can be found on the 6th floor of the terminal, the location of Metro-North's Operations Control Center. Here, 10 dispatchers on first and second shift handle 550 passenger trains a day. Metro-North operates as far as New Haven, Connecticut, plus 3 branches in that state. A ride on Metro-North train 829 out of Grand Central at 12:56 p.m. gave us a first-hand look at a less visible part of the terminal. When the New York Central built the new station, it depressed and decked over the tracks along Park Avenue. It also electrified the 4-track main line to Croton-on-Hudson. Chief Engineer William Wilgus proposed that real estate developers be allowed to erect buildings over the concealed tracks, a concept that came to be known as air rights. Combined with a tunnel built earlier between the original Grand Central and 96th Street, the result was the 2-mile-long Park Avenue Tunnel. With Grand Central acting as an anchor, skyscrapers and hotels took root above the central tracks under Park Avenue.
Protected by automatic train control. All these have to apply the brakes in suppression, and they have to stay there until it gets down to 45 miles an hour. He'll get a flashing overspeed light on his control panel.
I can see light shining through here. I guess you sometimes get snow down here.
Yeah, actually, the center tracks, which are we're on track 2. The far track over is 3 that is out of service.
Daylight greets us as we leave the tunnel for the Park Avenue Viaduct. This is trackage elevated on a fill through 40 blocks of Manhattan streets.
Again, you can't actually change over until you get about 880 RPMs of
Then we slow for our 1:07 p.m. stop at 125th Street Station in Harlem. The journey north to Croton gave us time to reflect on the history of the line. Poughkeepsie interests organized the Hudson River Railroad over the protests of the steamboat operators, the New York and Harlem, and those who said the railroad would destroy the beauty of the river. The railroad's answer to the last protest was that it would smooth off all the points sticking out into the river. The tracks would also even up the shoreline and bring a nice symmetry to it. The New York and Harlem had already staked out the middle of Manhattan, so the Hudson River Railroad built its line along the west side of the island. It intended to use steam as far south as 32nd Street, then horses. Construction began at the south end of the line, and by the end of 1849, an almost gradeless double-track railroad with only the gentlest of curves connected New York with Poughkeepsie, essentially the same route used by today's Hudson line.
Take them down a little Italy, Howard.
The gush of freight traffic on CSX's River Line belies the fate of America's railroads in the post-war era, a tale illustrated by the community of Newburgh, New York. From America's earliest days, Newburgh, New York seemed destined for great things. At Washington's headquarters on 84 Liberty Street, General George Washington learned about the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which formally acknowledged the independence of the United States. Washington lived here from April 1782 to August 1783, waiting for the British to leave New York under the terms of surrender. The home and grounds were eventually required by the government in 1848 and became the first National Historic Site. At Newburgh, Erie Railroad branch lines from Gray Court and Harriman join the West Shore Line. A switch stand marks the north end of the sole surviving branch, known on Conrail as the Newburgh Industrial Track. The branch crosses the river line near the south end of town. A local freight operates on the 5.3-mile branch to reach customers at Vales Gate. CSX freights duck under the Newburgh Industrial Track without so much as checking their speed. But in the days before the Poughkeepsie Bridge, Lehigh and Hudson River and Erie trains used the branch to reach the Newburgh car ferry. A relic from the car ferry survives at a private marina on Newburgh's riverfront. Rated at 15 tons, this wheel crane from the 19th century is among the largest hand-operated cranes built. It was used to lift freight from flat cars or gondolas for loading onto trucks or vice versa. Clearly it's been years since the crane handled freight on the Newburgh riverfront, but at one time the crane and the railroad itself were vital to Newburgh's vitality.
When I was an 8-9-year-old, the railroad was a really important means of transportation on the Hudson. So you could get the train in Hoboken, head north, and the little towns along the line were where all the shops were, and you'd move maybe 2 miles or a mile, and you'd stop. One little town, you'd move another 2 little miles, another stop. And coming into Newburgh was kind of interesting because it was like suddenly you were coming into kind of a haven. One little shop after another was the hub of shopping for a great many people, not only in Newburgh, but people in the surrounding towns used to hit the railroad, take the train into Newburgh, do their shopping, or walk the track. And it was one little shop after another, down Water Street and down Front Street. And the constant hustle and bustle. And right in the center of all of these small shops was the New York Central Railroad Station. And it was an important stop, an important destination, and for not only shopping, but also other activities in the Newburgh area.
In the post-war era, Americans largely abandoned passenger trains for private automobiles. As the stream of shoppers and visitors dried up, so did Newburgh.
Now it's like going into a desert. I mean, it's just has all been razed, all the stores gone. The attempt was to remodel and revitalize the area, and all it's done is paved it. It's desolate, and it's a shame. It once was the hub of activity and industry for the Newburgh area, and now it's nothing. It's actually barren. And that's a shame. That's a shame to experience that, to see it move from what it was.
For passenger train enthusiasts, Amtrak's Northeast Corridor between New York City and Washington, D.C. is the promised land. During our visit in 1996, we looked at 2 distinctly different ways of handling traffic: Amtrak's high-tech C-Tech dispatching center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Hunter, a manual interlocking tower in Newark, New Jersey. It's hard to believe that the busiest railroad in the country flows under the feet of these passengers at 30th Street. But you could say the same thing about what's going on above their heads on the 8th floor of the building. That's where Amtrak dispatches the trains those passengers ride.
At C-Tech, we're in charge of the safe and efficient movement of trains. We dispatch trains for Amtrak, New Jersey Transit, for the MARC Commuter Agency, for SEPTA, and dispatch freight trains for Conrail. The train dispatchers are directly in charge of these train movements. They display the signals and set the routes for the trains. They're also in charge of issuing any authorities that would be involved in train movement, whether it be speed restrictions or any protections that the trains might need. They talk directly by radio with the engineers, with the conductors, with the track department, with the CNS maintainers, anyone that would need to work on the railroad or need protection while they work on the railroad. The dispatcher would also relay any information from the trains themselves to the necessary personnel who would then deal with any given problem we have, whether it be a catenary problem, debris on the track, any authorities that they might need to receive to move the trains. Train dispatchers work 8-hour shifts, and the railroad operates 24 hours a day. They're working in a dimly lit room. It needs to be dark because we're looking at screens. It's similar to a movie theater in that regard. They like what they do. They actually seem to thrive on problems. You'll find that you do sit there, and if the trains run on time and the signals are displayed for the train movement, then everything runs along very nicely, but this is not a typical day. I like to think that we're paid to know what to do when there's trouble. Anybody can sit here and pull signals up for trains to move. Previously, before this operation was put into effect, we had block operators who worked in towers, in train towers. They would display the signals and set the routes for the trains under the jurisdiction of the train dispatcher. They would record these numbers on a block sheet, report that information to the dispatcher who would record it on his sheet, and any train movements or any changes that he wanted, he would then instruct the following block operator to make those changes involving routing of trains or, again, protection of trains or stopping trains, whatever was needed to be done. The dispatchers have a VDU, a unit that is like this unit. They have a touchscreen capacity and a series of commands across the bottom of this screen. They can then touch the function that they need, and then whether it might be a clear signal or reversing a switch, whatever they need to do, they have a touchscreen capacity, and then they execute that command, and the computer would then, through a series of relays out on the ground, it would then perform that function. Now, we're sitting here in Philadelphia, and we're dispatching trains that are leaving Washington Terminal 135 miles away.
Struggling over the Cumberland Mountains between Cumberland, Maryland and the top of the grade at Sand Patch, Pennsylvania, CSX's Sand Patch grade offers some of the best train watching in the East. Case in point, the timetable station of Mance, home to a less famous but equally busy horseshoe curve in Pennsylvania.
One of the perhaps less well-known features of Sand Patch is the horseshoe curve at Mance. Essentially at the same latitude as the more famous horseshoe curve on the Pennsylvania Railroad farther north. And for the same reason, the railroad was scratching to gain elevation any way it could. Now, the horseshoe curve at Mance was a natural horseshoe. The B&O didn't have to do very much cutting or filling in the 1870s to complete it, unlike the Pensie's horseshoe curve, which required massive quantities of fill and an immense engineering to do it. This one was simply carved out of essentially the end of the Wills Creek Valley as the railroad looped around in an almost perfect horseshoe, at one point coming within 600 yards of its other line. Mance is also where the grade on Sand Patch increases dramatically. Instead of running at 1% or 1.5%, the grade from Mance to the summit gets close to 2%. It may seem like a small difference, but when you're shoving a train at maximum tonnage up that kind of hill, especially around curves like that, every little bit hurts. This was where, on the westbound ascent, both men and machine were tested to their fullest.
CSX predecessor B&O is long gone from Sand Patch. But historian John Hankey believes the spirit of the railroad lives on in Amtrak's version of the B&O's premier Chicago to Washington passenger train, the Capital Limited. Amtrak's Capital Limited calls on Sand Patch twice daily on its journey between Washington, D.C. and Chicago. From its high-tech GE Genesis diesels to its smooth-riding Superliner cars, this may be Amtrak's premier train in the East. If so, it's an honor shared with its namesake, B&O's own Capital Limited.
Probably the finest passenger train to operate over the Sand Patch grade was the B&O's Capital Limited. Inaugurated in May of 1923, Daniel Willard was president of the B&O then. When he took charge of the railroad in 1910, he vowed that he would not advertise passenger service, nor would he put on a first-class passenger train until the B&O had the tracks, the employees, and the equipment that would make the company proud. It wasn't until 1923 that he felt confident in his own administration to field an all-Pullman deluxe train between Washington and Chicago in direct competition with the Broadway Limited and the 20th Century Limited. The Capital was always a classy train. It carried a full B&O dining car, lounge cars, a barber shop, and some of the finest Pullman equipment on the rails anywhere in the East. The B&O's philosophy was to run a first-class passenger service in all respects. It adhered to that philosophy to the very end, so that the last Capital Limited, eastbound on April 30th, 1971, still had the fine service, still had the gracious attendants, the gracious dining car stewards. It still had the class that the Capital Limited was famous for. Amtrak's Capital Limited is likewise a fine train. It offers superliners. It's a reasonable schedule. It doesn't hurry. Nothing hurries over Sand Patch. But I think in the East, at least, one of the finest, most magical runs available is to take the eastbound Amtrak Capital Limited out of Pittsburgh on a spring morning, coming down the Youghiogheny Valley, across Sandpatch in the early morning light, perhaps enjoying a meal in the dining car. It's very, very easy then, with the mists rising off of the rivers and the sun streaking in from the east, to imagine that this is the old B&O, that you're on the Capitol Limited of 50 years ago. The same sights and smells and sounds, the same experiences, the same scenery.
North of Sandpatch stands a landmark in American railroad engineering, Conrail's famed Horseshoe Curve. Located in the Allegheny Mountains on the former Pennsylvania Railroad route between Altoona and Johnstown, Pennsylvania, it remains the most popular train watching spot in the East, and for good reason.
The Pennsylvania Diesel on display at the Horseshoe Curve National Historic Site looks out on one of America's greatest engineering feats. In the mid-1850s, the Pennsylvania Railroad expanded west across the state of Pennsylvania until it came face-to-face with the Allegheny Mountain front. J. Edgar Thompson plotted the railroad's battle plan. Irish immigrants chewed away at the face of the mountain using little more than hand tools and dynamite. But instead of climbing straight up the face of the Alleghenies, Thompson built a 2,400-foot loop of track that doubled back on itself. Horseshoe Curve remains unchanged to this day. Trains climb 91 feet per mile, which means the west side of the curve is 122 feet higher than the east side. There are several reasons why Horseshoe Curve has earned its reputation as one of the premier train watching spots in America.
Well, what I like about the curve is the fact that it has trains on it, and it's beautiful scenery up here, and you get real good fresh air every now and then, get out of the city, and the people that you meet up here from all over the place, different walks of life and stuff, and just have a good time up here along with other people.
Perhaps the biggest attraction is the park itself. It was established in 1879 and is now a National Historic Landmark, funded largely by the National Park Service. From the parking lot, you can see trains rumbling over the roof of the Visitor Center. This 6,400 square foot building contains an array of displays and artifacts that interpret the history of the curve, right down to these cans and bottles of Curve beer. An inclined plane railway shuttles visitors between the interpretive center and a trackside observation area. Other on-location spots, such as Cajon Pass, may offer more variety in terms of the number of railroads you can see in one place. But this is the only spot in America where visitors are invited to get this close to a working railroad.
And what brings you up here then?
Trains.
Just like watching them through here?
Watching them, smelling them, everything. Get as close as I can to them without them getting upset.
What makes this such a neat place to come?
They don't stop. Every 5 minutes you get one. Coming where I come from, it's kind of slow. You gotta wait every 25 minutes, half an hour. You might be lucky to see a train.
It's a different range of people. You go from extreme rail buffs that are here from the time I get here to the time I leave, to people that come up here to look at one train go by and then go home. I've interviewed people from Australia, that traveled 10,000 miles to get here. Just someone this morning from Canada just came by himself to see it. So people from all around the world, believe it or not, do come here.
I think it's neat. I love watching the people, you know, watching the trains. You know, the engineer waves to them, you know, they wave back. It's neat. It's a, you know, it's a one-on-one almost, you know, and I love the scenery. I've been coming here since I was a kid myself. My mother and dad used to bring me here also when I was, you know, young.
The spectacular of the curve, having a train on all three sides of you continuously, and getting two trains at once going in each direction, and just, you know, it's amazing how they built this place, you know, and what it means.
It doesn't boast the mountain vistas of Horseshoe Curve or Sand Patch. The only interlocking towers on the line are abandoned. But the mostly parallel routes of Conrail and Norfolk Southern between Cleveland and Buffalo have nothing to apologize for. Just ask any of the fans who regularly flock to one of the busiest spots in the area, Silver Creek, New York. For producer Paul Schneider, Silver Creek is a hallowed name. It may not look like much today, but when Schneider was a teen growing up in Burlington, Ontario, Silver Creek was the promised land. Older rail fans carried back stories of the Silver Creek Depot platform, a grandstand seat to take in the exotic diesels of Penn Central and Norfolk and Western, as well as pool power from Never Never Land railroads like Union Pacific and the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy. Over time, the Silver Creek Depot followed the Penn Central and Norfolk and Western into railroad history, but that didn't stop Schneider from feeling that he'd found the Holy Grail when he arrived on sacred ground for a few hours of train watching. Schneider isn't the only person drawn to railroading outside of big cities. Local fans are quick to point out the charm of train watching between Dunkirk and Buffalo.
Well, the reason that I spend most of my train watching time out on the lines west of Buffalo is that that's where I grew up. When I was a youngster, I was only a year old. My dad took me up to the old depot in Angola, New York, in a buggy to watch the steam locomotives go through Angola on the old New York Central Railroad. In fact, we could sit on my grandmother's porch and look down Main Street and see the engines going through the grade crossing. So it's like going home to come out here. You're out in the country. There's not a lot of traffic. There's a lot of good places to stop and park by the tracks and watch trains in relative comfort and safety. There's a lot of action out this way, especially where the two lines are real close together. You hardly ever have to wait more than maybe half hour, 45 minutes, you'll see a train. So there's plenty to watch, and it's just a pleasant thing to do, pleasant place to go. Trains are always interesting, and even today you see these long unit trains of auto racks and coal porters, things like that. It's different, but it's still a train. It's still interesting. It's still an iron wheel on a rail going somewhere, from somewhere.
East of Silver Creek, you find yourself in grape country. Vineyards and rolling hills bring to mind California's Napa Valley wine-growing region. It's a far cry from Cleveland's Flats, or NS running down the middle of West 19th Street in Erie. But then again, that's the point.
You don't have to get very far out of Buffalo to get into what they call the grape belt. It really starts just west of Angola, which is roughly, say, 25 miles from Buffalo. From there, all the way down to Erie, Pennsylvania, along the lake shore is what they call a grape belt, where they grow a lot of Concord grapes and some other varieties as well. The Welch Grape Juice Company was founded in Westfield, New York, and it's still there. And there is a lot of little, I guess you call them micro wineries that have sprung up, scattered around here. Wine tasting tours are very popular now. And it's the soil, I guess, is just very good for grapes. It's not good for much of anything else. There's no real dairy farming or truck farming around here. It's basically vineyards.
Norfolk Southern's Cleveland district between Cleveland and Buffalo now competes with CSX, which inherited the Chicago line after the Conrail breakup. One name in the region remains the same, though: locomotive builder General Electric Transportation Systems. For anyone steeped in railroad history, Erie, Pennsylvania is synonymous with General Electric. GE had long been a supplier of electric traction equipment to U.S. railroads. A month after the company's inception in 1892, the Baltimore and Ohio contracted with GE to supply the electrical installations and equipment to haul trains through a 1.5-mile-long tunnel on a new belt line in Baltimore. GE's first internal combustion locomotive was a 300-horsepower oil-electric known by its construction number 8835. Powered by an Ingersoll-Rand 6-cylinder inline engine, the humble 8835 marked the first significant application of diesel-electric power on U.S. railroads. Somewhere, a steam engine shuddered. The success of the 8835 led to a consortium between GE, Ingersoll-Rand, and American Locomotive, known as ALCO. The team built 35 600-horsepower box cab diesels between 1925 and 1931, including Central New Jersey No. 1000, generally regarded as the world's first commercially successful diesel-electric locomotive. While continuing its industrial-sized locomotive production, GE in 1940 formed a closer relationship with ALCO for large road locomotives. The two firms joined their sales forces and jointly began marketing a line of ALCO GE locomotives, including those early FA cab unit demonstrators. A softening in GE's commitment to the future of the straight electric locomotive appeared in 1954. That's when a rolling laboratory of 4 covered wagon-type diesel-electric locomotives began extended testing on the Erie Railroad. Powered by Cooper-Bessemer diesels, GE was ostensibly developing new universal road units for the export market. But there was more to the Universal series than the 400 or so units that sailed off to customers in Turkey, South Africa, and Argentina. In 1960, GE unveiled the U-25B, a 2,500 horsepower road switcher with a number of significant design improvements. GE 751 started life as export test bed number XP241, then switched numbers when it debuted as a domestic U-25B. A second set of demonstrators built between 1961 and 1962 consisted of conventional U-25s, 3 high-nose units, and low-nose 2501. The U-Series allowed GE to capture the number 2 market spot from Alco within 3 years. In 1983, GE production outstripped Electromotive successor EMD for the first time. To anyone steeped in the history of railroad transportation, General Electric is synonymous with Erie. When GE's early plants at Schenectady, New York, and Lynn, Massachusetts reached capacity around 1907, GE purchased 700 acres in Erie. 4 years later, most work was transferred to the Erie Works, which remains the center of GE's locomotive building business. How do you build a modern locomotive? For GE, the process begins with a locomotive frame assembled in Building 5. At this point, it contains little else but a fuel tank, some electrical cables, and an anonymous order number. Perched on shop trucks, the platform awaits its turn at Building 10, known as locomotive assembly. There are some 13,000 parts in a Dash 9 locomotive. With the exception of a few accessories, they're all brought together in Building 10. The 307,000 square foot erecting shop is at the heart of GE's Erie complex. Station 3 is where most of the assembly process takes place. Here, workers set, bolt, and weld components and subassemblies into place. Building a new locomotive takes from 21 to 25 days, a schedule Erie's 5,500 workers are understandably proud of.
Here in Erie, what we do at headquarters here is we produce diesel-electric locomotives. Again, we said that we're going to produce somewhere around 800 this year, so we track that daily. We ship to a tight schedule. We are focused on our customer here, so our 2 biggest priorities are reliability, or the quality of the locomotive going out, as well as hitting the customer's time requirements. And we really believe that that's what we focus on here. We have a lot of good people working towards those ends. Things that we've been working on is reliability, obviously is extremely important to the railroads, especially mission reliability, as well as on-time delivery. And when we talk about this factory here and meeting their commitments, they've done an excellent job of meeting their commitments to customers, and that means a lot, especially whenever we're in times now where there's a boom in the market, and that boom creates a need for power and a lack of power. When UP and when BNSF have that the problems with their service, they rely on that power being there, and it better be delivered on time.
As a safety measure, all handrails and safety chains must be in place before any top deck work is carried out. Once it's done, however, the transition from empty platform to locomotive happens quickly. One of the first operating assemblies to be set and welded in place is the main cab, which consists of the complete operating cab and nose. Appliances such as the traction motor blowers, air compressor, and lube oil cooler are installed. Then the rad cab, which comprises the engine radiators and rear hood section of the locomotive, is attached. The heart of the locomotive is the 7 FDL-16 engine and GMG 197 alternator. Once they've been installed, the remaining work is completed in short order. Earlier, the crane operator in the overhead crane spotted 2 rollerblade 6-motor trucks at a strategic position at Station 4. Now it's time to pick up the C-44 and place it on those trucks. To quote Trains author Greg McDonnell, locomotives aren't meant to fly. Nonetheless, the crane operator deftly lowers the big C-44 to a soft, silent union with its trucks. Without so much as a bump, the 200-ton behemoth touches down. The next stop is the paint booths next door. Here, new units are sanded, masked, taped, painted, and lettered. The Bobcat hustles the completed unit into daylight for the first time. A brief ride on a transfer table delivers it to an open bay in Building 26. In Station 5, crews complete the installation of computer equipment and display screens in the cab console. Cab seats, number boards, and a host of other appliances are installed. Building 26 is also the home of Locomotive Test and Ship. Here, each locomotive gets a comprehensive system-level function test that requires nearly 650 operator verifications, sign-offs, and quality checks. Junctions and crossings lace southwestern Ontario between Toronto, Sarnia, and Windsor. Although spots such as Canadian Pacific's Guelph Junction command a loyal following, nothing compares to the traffic and scenic beauty of Canadian National's Bayview Junction. This is where 3 CN routes and 1 CP route meet near Hamilton, Ontario. If any place in Canada deserves the name Canadian Crossroad, it's Bayview. It sits at milepost 0.0, a clue to how strategic its junctions are. That's right, we said junctions, plural. The timetable station of Bayview is essentially a giant Y composed of 3 junctions. Heading downgrade from Copetown, eastbounds sail through Hamilton West on their way to Burlington. A handful of trains takes the single track to the left. This is known as the Cowpath. It brings trains off the Dundas sub and into Hamilton Yard, 2 miles to the east. The line above the Cowpath is CP's Hamilton sub. It climbs the Niagara Escarpment to connect with the Galt sub at Guelph Junction. Because of the stiff grade, CP tries to use it for eastbounds only. At Bayview Junction, the Dundas sub connects with the Oakville sub. This eastbound train has entered the Oakville sub and will continue east to Burlington, where it will likely take the Halton sub to CN's McMillan Yard. Other trains stay on the Oakville sub on their way east into Hamilton. The third junction is Hamilton Junction. The tracks on the left belong to CP. CP trains coming off the Hamilton sub from Guelph Junction use these tracks to reach CP's crew change point at Kinnear Yard in Hamilton. CP also has trackage rights on CN's Oakville sub between here and Toronto. The majority of the action at Hamilton Junction falls to CN. This train is headed to Bayview Junction, where it will continue east to Burlington. Any one of these junctions would be enough to draw rail fans to trackside. Factor in Bayview's location in the natural beauty of the Royal Botanical Gardens, and what you have is arguably the best train watching spot in Canada.
Here at Bayview, this is about the best place to watch the trains. You can get CN, you can get CP, you can get VIA, you can get Amtrak, you can get all the stuff, the new stuff, the old stuff. And we've been coming here since the dawn of time. And if trains get kind of slow, we've got other things we can do here. We feed the birds, watch the animals, and we have a real great time. A bunch of guys come out on the weekends, could be 10 or 15 of us, and just really enjoy ourselves. Even bring a picnic lunch sometimes and spend the day. VIA runs some pretty good, interesting trains sometimes. They'll get the push-pull on 70, which usually comes down on the weekends, and stainless steel cars, a lot of which were made in the States originally. Those cars, believe it or not, are older than the blue line that was on CN, yet they fixed them all up and they look really great. This is about the best place really to watch trains because you're not getting any problems from a lot of people, a lot of traffic, the police or anybody else saying don't get on our property or anything else. So this is a good place just to come and watch it. The sun angles are great all the time. You can come bright and early in the morning and get all the shots you want. So it's really a good place to be.